Good morning, guys and girls. I hope everybody's doing well today on Thursday, April 2nd. So today's lesson is number 13 in your OneNote content library. Please locate it. It is titled Lewis and Clarke. All right, most of our class notebooks will look like this. We are up to lesson 13. Here it is in the content library. A couple reminders about today's lesson. If you zoom out and you look in the margin, you'll notice that I included 2 screenshots of important slides from my presentation, which will begin in a minute. And then there's a very cool video for today's lesson about the Lewis and Clarke expedition and their famous exploration of the Western territories in the United States after Thomas Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Territory. Let's get started. I want you to find the Do Now at the top of your worksheet. And I want you to use this first picture on your worksheet to answer the Do Now question. I will go over it with you in a moment. I'm pausing. You should get started. Okay, so in 1803, even before the Louisiana Purchase had been finalized, Thomas Jefferson, President of the United States, began planning an expedition to explore the unknown territory. Jefferson hired Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to lead the expedition. Lewis and Clark began planning their journey immediately. So before we go over the Do Now, let's talk a little bit about Lewis and Clark. Lewis and Clark were both Army men. Meriwether Lewis was an Army captain who was from Virginia, and Thomas Jefferson knew him well. Meriwether Lewis was chosen by Jefferson to be the head of this exploration into the Louisiana Purchase territory. William Clark was also an Army officer. He was a lieutenant. And William Clark, who was also born in Virginia, had served under George Washington in the Army during the Revolutionary War. So Thomas Jefferson chose 2 Virginia men that he knew and trusted, who were military officers, to lead an expedition out into the Western Territory. And their number one goal was to try to find an all-water route to the Pacific. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Now let's explain the Do Now. Your job in the Do Now is to choose 3 supplies from the list that you think are most important. And for each, you're going to explain why they're most important. Now, as we go over the Do Now questions, I want you to think about the Lewis and Clark expedition for a little bit. These 2 men, along with a team of other Army soldiers and, ship captains, these 2 men are exploring unknown territory. There was nothing, or at least very little, development west of the Mississippi River. The Spanish had small settlements out there. The French had small settlements out there, but there's no towns, there's no civilization, there's no roads. So the Lewis and Clark expedition is going to rely on a larger ship like the one in the picture and smaller rowboats and maybe animals like mules or horses. This is a very dangerous expedition into unknown territory. Now, to get us started, I always use the Fortnite example. What is your best weapons loadout when you're in a match? Lewis and Clark had to choose wisely. In Fortnite, you only get 5 weapons or materials, right? So for the Do Now, I want you to think about which of these supplies, and I'll even expand the list to 5. Choose 5. Which of these 5 supplies do you think would be most important for Lewis and Clark as they're beginning their expedition? I'm going to choose my list and explain it to you. All right. Number 1, I am going with rifles and gunpowder. They're going to need to hunt. They might need to protect themselves. Those are a definite necessity. There's no wrong answers here. I'll explain why in a little bit. Number 2, I'm bringing some food. 193 pounds of portable soup sounds good to me. Number 3, I'm going to go with my compass so that I know where I am going. Number 4, I'm going to go with writing paper, ink, and crayons. You guys are looking at me like I'm crazy right now. The reason I chose that, Thomas Jefferson had given these men mission objectives. And one of the things that Thomas Jefferson told Lewis and Clarke, he wanted them to map the territory. He wanted them to draw the wildlife. He wanted them to record journals. And that is why the writing paper, ink, and crayons were so important to Lewis and Clarke. Along those lines, my last item for my weapons loadout would be gifts for the Native Americans. Another part of their mission objective was to make peace with Native Americans as they met them. So Lewis and Clarke brought gifts in order to trade with the Native Americans. Now, you guys that remember my trick questions in class, this is a trick question because the real answer is everything. Lewis and Clarke brought all of this with them as they prepared for their expedition out into the Western Territory. Now, on your worksheet, we're going to begin with these key terms. If you take a look on OneNote, you have the definitions on your worksheet already. The key terms are here. But I want to explain them a little bit before we get started. All right, Thomas Jefferson hires Lewis and Clarke in 1803. They were commissioned by the government, which means that through the president and Congress, a contract would be written up, and they're being paid for this mission. This was not just a favor for Thomas Jefferson. They're being paid by the United States government to explore the new territory. This mission is called an expedition. It's a great word. An expedition is like a exploring mission. It's also a mission with a specific purpose. You can see that an expedition is a journey taken for a specific purpose. Lewis and Clarke were skilled surveyors besides army officers. They knew how to measure land. They knew how to measure size and elevation of land. And a word that's going to be a throwback to the beginning of the year, they both had experience in cartography, which means they knew how to make maps. And that was part of Thomas Jefferson's goal for this mission. He wanted Lewis and Clarke to map this new land that the United States had just acquired. It's unexplored land, and past the Mississippi River, there were not many maps showing. So here's the Mississippi River. There were not many maps showing what the Western territories were like. So for President Jefferson, he doesn't know exactly what the land is like. Pause and think for a minute. Why does the president want maps of the new land that his country has acquired? All right, hopefully you gave that a little bit of thought. Remember, the United States acquired all of this territory. That is the Louisiana Purchase. Jefferson wants maps of the land because his plan is that Americans will move out there. He wants Americans to explore the land. He wants Americans to move west. He wants to know where the rivers are. He wants to know where the fertile land is. But most importantly, Jefferson wants to know, how can we reach the Pacific Ocean? So I'm going to erase my markings here on the map, and I'm going to show you Jefferson's main goal. Jefferson's main goal was to try to find an all-water route to the Pacific. Now, you can see on my map that the blue rivers used by Lewis and Clarke to reach the Pacific Ocean are highlighted, but there's one problem. Why can't you take an all-water route to the Pacific Ocean? What's in your way? What would prevent you from taking a boat or a small ship on the rivers all the way from, let's say, a city like St. Louis on the Mississippi to the Pacific River? To the Pacific Ocean? The answer is the Rocky Mountains. And because of the Rocky Mountains, Lewis and Clarke did not achieve that mission objective. Did they reach the Pacific Ocean? Yes. Did they find an all-water route to the Pacific Ocean? No. The Rocky Mountains are in the way. Now let's go back and finish up our key terms. I just explained the Northwest Passage. The all-water route to the Pacific Ocean does not exist. The Rocky Mountains form a natural blockade. Lewis and Clarke reached the Pacific Ocean anyway. It took several years. I have to look up the exact amount of time. It took several years for Lewis and Clarke to reach the Pacific Ocean. This was a very dangerous expedition. All right, we're going to move on. On your OneNote worksheet, you are now going to zoom out into the margin. Today we have a really cool lesson about the Lewis and Clarke expedition. And it's actually filmed almost like a TV show. It's not a documentary where there will be old people talking about the Lewis and Clarke expedition. There is a narrator, but there's also actors that are playing Lewis and Clarke and showing you what some of the beginnings of the mission were like and some of the most dangerous parts of their mission. While you watch the Lewis and Clarke Great Journey West video, I would like you to answer these questions, 1, 2, and 3, but also answer the summary question. 1, 2, 3, and the summary question. When you finish, if you like to draw, you can do this summary assignment on the bottom of the worksheet. Draw a simple picture to summarize the topic. You only have to do this if you are motivated, if there's something that you want to draw. I know some of you love to draw. If you don't love to draw, you don't have to do the summary picture. Just stick with the 3 questions that I highlighted here in purple and the summary question. Enjoy it. This is one of my favorite videos. The Lewis and Clarke Great Journey West really does a good job of showing you how difficult the expedition was. And be prepared. You're going to find dangerous animals. You're going to find steep cliffs. You're going to find roaring rivers. And, of course, you're going to find some angry Native Americans. So enjoy the Lewis and Clarke video, Great Journey West. Excuse me. Get started on those questions. You can split screen it while you watch. As always, email me with